Hello everyone and welcome to the Music Professor channel. My name is Matthew King and I'm here with Loki. We're going to pick up on some of those topics we've been talking about in shorts recently, and there's a discussion that's happened on several shorts about what would have happened if Beethoven had lived longer, and that's always a fascinating topic and I may well come back to it because it's just fun. But what if we extend that discussion to three very different but very famous great composers who died too early? And I suppose the most extreme one is Franz Schubert, possibly of all the most incredible composers to die young. He might be the most extreme example. I'm not saying there aren't great composers like Pergolesi who died even younger, but Schubert has that, what romantic poets would have called a divine spark. There's something in Schubert, with all due respect to Pergolesi, amazing composer, but Schubert always feels like one of the most, well, let's put it this way, the C major quintet, which he wrote literally months before his death, could be for me one of the most incredible pieces ever composed. I don't know, I mean, it just seems to me like music from another realm, though it is deeply human and wonderful. One of the many fabulous moments in the C major quintet, I mean, we've talked a lot about the slow movement. The first movement is a miracle. Everything is amazing. But look at this scherzo of his, this huge, these wonderful, the sort of thing that Brahms did later on, these wonderful suspensions, and the great sound of the quintet. I'm not going to try and play it on the piano, it's so fabulous. And then right at the heart, this dark, dark song, this poem of resignation. It's almost like something out of Winterreise, this faltering and octaves that pull us down towards G flat. Feels so remote from C major. It is, it's a whole tritone away. G flat major, plagal to D flat, and we have this sort of chorale of, I don't know, death, with that cello over the top. Ba-bum. And then it goes minor, pianissimo and minor. With the cello and the first violin together and the G flat coming over the top in the viola. In the second half, we've got first violin and cello in octaves. Second cello drops down, now a different configuration. It's so amazing with the cello on the top and a viola underneath. It makes a different sound. And then it goes darker. C sharp minor. That's so incredible. So we've gone to B major and then we drop down again. And then, typical Schubertian drop, but incredible. Back to D flat major, and it's just fabulous. So that's the sort of thing that Schubert was writing in his months before his death. What would he have been writing in 10 years' time? On some level, it's almost an irrelevant question because, of course, it is irrelevant. He didn't. and he wasn't going to. And perhaps much of the astonishing miracle of his final year, 1828, was him almost desperately churning out these masterpieces, sort of forcing them out like treasure that had to be mined out of his brain before he died. I don't know, because I don't actually know whether he really thought he was going to die. He had syphilis, although I'm not entirely sure if that's the disease that finally finished him off. Some of you may know better than I do what the medical situation was in Schubert's life, but it was precarious. The story of Schubert's final year is an amazing one, because there he is apparently having to produce masterpiece after masterpiece. I can't quite think of anything else like it. There's a terrible tragedy there, isn't there? And 31 is really no age at all, is it? It's unbelievably young. But it still feels like late period work. There's another fascinating thing. How does Schubert do that at the end of his life? He's producing these pieces that are full of regret and loss, and death is hovering over it. And it's got incredible poignancy and beauty as well. He was taking counterpoint lessons in his final year. There are sketches for a 10th symphony, which Luciano Berio, the brilliant 20th century Italian composer, used in a piece called Rendering, and that's a fascinating piece if you want to hear those sketches. Kind of Berio refused to finish the piece. He just allows them to exist in this kind of fragmented state in that piece, with strange kind of clusters and mysterious kind of twilight regions between the sketches. It's a fascinating piece. He also, I think, felt that perhaps songs, he'd written 600 of them, and I think he talked about moving away from songs. And I understand that. It's a bit like rock music. It's not a genre for anyone over 30. The Beatles knew this. They broke up around the age of 30. I feel it with Schubert. He's sort of hinting, I think, that he's moving away from it. It's a young person's genre, and he's going to move into sort of grander things, symphonic things. He possibly had his eye on opera, although I'm not completely convinced that Schubert would have been a great opera composer. He might have actually ended up being more like Brahms or Schumann. In other words, amazing song composers, but not opera composers. There is a difference between the two. You can be a genius at writing for voice in that kind of intimate setting of poems, but struggle more with drama. It's a different entity. And if you think about great opera composers, Mozart, Wagner, Verdi, Puccini, none of those four are necessarily famous as song composers. There is somebody, however, who is, and that's Benjamin Britten. He's good at both, isn't he? Well, who knows? Perhaps Schubert would have matured. Oh, someone else, Henry Purcell. In other words, English composers. Interesting. Schubert, hard to know. Would Schubert have taken on opera? It is hard to say. My hunch is that his real talent was a bit like Brahms later, was chamber music, song, piano music, symphonies. You know, these are the solid sort of classical German things. Let me know what you think in the comments. So the next composer, I'll briefly talk about this. In one of the shorts recently, I speculated about Mozart. My feeling about Mozart, if you want to know what my thoughts are, again, I'll say what they are. I think he'd have gone to Britain. Just like his friend Haydn had done. They'd had this meal before Haydn set off. I think it was 1790. Haydn and Mozart had a meal together, a sort of farewell dinner. And Mozart was very sad because his friend Haydn was going off and he didn't think they'd see each other again. And he was right. But it was because Mozart, died, not because Haydn was too old, which is what he thought was going to be the problem. Haydn came back, you know, a rich man, having been the toast of London. And he went back again for a second trip later in the 1790s. Now, if Mozart had survived, my hunch is there were talks going on with Salonen, and Haydn was wanting to get Salonen to bring Mozart over. So I think that would have happened. And I think that Mozart's friendship with the Irish tenor Michael Kelly would have put him in contact with Sheridan, the great Irish playwright who was big in London at that time and working with Michael Kelly. And if Mozart had joined that little theatrical enterprise, fresh from the triumph of the Magic Flute. Remember that the Magic Flute was the big breakout success of Mozart's career and would have made Mozart rich anyway on the back of the 100 or more performances in Vienna in 1791, and then it toured and became a huge international success. So he was already made, in effect. If he'd gone to London, he might have teamed up with Sheridan and they might have written amazing English, I don't know, almost like musicals, English singspiels. Imagine that. English singspiels with these amazing post-Magic Flute scores by Mozart. Can you imagine such a thing? Mozart's style had become this wonderful refined combination in the Magic Flute of a sort of folk-like idiom, a sort of very self-conscious simplicity in these sort of beautiful Masonic C major things that he does. I'll give you an example. So look, here's an example in the Magic Flute, this extraordinary melody, sort of Masonic melody. During the Tamina has to undergo some trials, and you have this flute accompanied by brass and timbs. It's such a strange mix. And 3, 4, and the chords are all 1 and 5. 3, 4. There's the timp at the bottom. Flute and brass, it's such a fascinating kind of ceremonial mix. 2, just 1 and 5. Now look at this. 2, 3. Suddenly the tonic seventh becomes this miracle chord. What's this? Subdominant seems exotic. And then the orchestra comes in, and there's something fascinating about the simplicity of it. It's absolutely simple and yet marvellously strange and exotic. I think that's remarkable. I can't think of any other composer who could do such a thing. And when you hear it orchestrated the way he does, it's even more fabulous. What would Mozart have written later? So we can't speculate too much about this, but I'm imagining success in England with musicals. Mozart hitting the West End, writing these amazing pieces with Sheridan. And that's something that I've thought for some time, that's a very likely outcome for him. And then I think at some point he would have returned to Vienna. He wasn't going to ever be able to return to Salzburg, where he was in effect an exile from Salzburg. While the Prince Archbishop was there was no two-way traffic. And his father had died, so Salzburg was no-go, but he very likely would have returned to Vienna to retire. And I could imagine him producing amazing chamber works in his old age. Maybe a few more symphonies too. Hard to imagine what they would have been, but I can't think of him embracing early Romanticism. You know, Weber, who was a sort of distant relative of his, or cousin of his wife, Constanze, had sort of captured the German Romantic thing in the 1820s with Der Freischütz. What would Mozart have thought of that? It's hard to know. Rather like Beethoven, I can't see Mozart fully embracing Romanticism, though he himself, I'd be very keen to point this out, is a sort of proto-romantic composer. Think of this sort of wonderful thing. These amazing slow movements from the piano concertos, so many things in Mozart hint at a kind of Romanticism, don't they? I think it was E.T.A. Hoffmann who said that Mozart was a romantic composer. All I'm speculating is some sort of retirement, a rich Mozart, possibly producing, in his late years, producing some mainly chamber music since he was so good at doing that. Perhaps retiring from theatrical projects. It'd be nice to imagine, didn't happen. The other composer that's fascinating is Gustav Mahler, who died at 50. People forget just how young he was. And it was the grueling double job of being a major international conductor and a major composer who simply wouldn't take holidays. He just alternated between those two back-breaking jobs, and it finished him off. If he'd lived longer, like Richard Strauss, who, of course, Strauss had a stronger constitution, he was doing the same. He was also an international conductor and a major composer, and he sort of managed to make it work, and he lived until 1949. What would Mahler have done? I've heard people speculate that Mahler would have followed his friend Schoenberg into atonality. There's a hint of it in the 10th Symphony when he unleashes this terrifying chord. Which I always think is rather like Munch's Scream. It is just an orchestral scream. And it portents the possibility of Mahler embracing certainly dissonance on a higher level than hitherto. Of course, he was a significant dissonant composer. His music is full of dissonance, but within that late Romantic idiom of his. I don't think, however, that he would have followed Schoenberg. I can't see any real hint of it in those late pieces. There's a tonality that's hovering on the edge, but that's part of its richness. I can't see him abandoning that. You could say the same about Strauss, and he was similar. I think a little like Strauss, he would have maintained a tonal idiom, but no doubt pushing it in directions that it had yet to be pushed. I also think, another thing that I think might have influenced him again from Schoenberg, and I can imagine him doing this, is moving away from titanic symphonies to something smaller, chamber-like combinations or chamber orchestra combinations. Which he was masterly at. You get examples of this in the song cycles, the Rückert-Lieder, for example. So I can imagine him embracing a more concise approach to the orchestra. That would be my guess about Mahler. That's about as far as I can speculate with him. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, because these speculations are so fascinating and they're not completely idle. I think they tell us something about the composer when we start to imagine where they might have gone thereafter. It's just a fascinating thing to do. And it's a fun game. Thanks for watching.